Are we good?
Yes.
May I approach the witness?
Yes, you may. You may proceed.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Officer McElligott.
Good afternoon.
Would you state your name and spell your last name for the record, please?
Officer Joseph McElligott, McElligott.
And how are you employed?
I work for the Chicago Police Department, the 8th District.
And so, Officer, you tend to speak a little bit loud, a little bit softly, and a little bit quickly. So if I could ask you to slow down a little and perhaps talk into the microphone. Okay. Thank you. How long have you been a Chicago police officer?
17 years.
Back in October of 2014, where were you working?
I was working BD 15 Robert.
How long had you worked at 815 Robert?
About 4 years.
And what is 815 Robert?
It's a beat in the 8th District. It's the north end of the district.
Now, on October 20th, 2014, where were you working?
I was working BD 15 Robert.
With whom were you working?
Officer Thomas Gaffney.
Do you see Officer Gaffney in the courtroom today?
Yes, I do.
Judge, we will stipulate the in-court identification.
All right, there's an in-court the record will reflect an in-court identification of defendant Gaffney.
How long had you partnered with Officer Gaffney back at the time of October 20th, 2014?
At the time, it was probably around 2 years.
And what shift did you have that?
I worked the midnight shift.
What hours of those?
9 p.m. to 6 a.m.
Were you in uniform that night?
Yes, I was.
And was Officer Gaffney in uniform that night?
Yes, he was.
What kind of a car were you driving that night?
It was a Chevy Tahoe.
And was it marked?
It was marked.
Did it have sirens and everything?
Yes.
Who was driving?
Officer Gaffney was.
Did you receive a radio call shortly after you started your shift?
Yes.
And do you recall what that call was?
Yes.
What was it?
It was a holding an offender call.
Do you remember anything else about the call?
It said a citizen was holding an offender for breaking into trucks or cars.
If you have a notebook in front of you, Officer McElligott, could you look behind tab number 2? That is People's Exhibit Radio Transcript 1, which has been admitted into evidence.
Did you say tab 2?
Yes, sir. Have you seen this transcript before, Officer?
Yes, I have.
And is it a transcript of the radio call back?
Yes.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, we would play the first 6 lines of People's Exhibit radio call.
Right. And there's no objection, Mr. McKay?
No.
Mr. Pugh or Mr. Breen?
Objection, Your Honor.
Mr. Fahey?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, you can play it.
Thank you.
815, Robert. Today, holding citizen 4100 Kildare by the United Rental, a male we caught breaking into trucks and stealing radios. He's holding up.
Is that the call that you received that evening?
Yes, it is.
And what did you have any information other than that radio call at the time you got to the scene?
No.
Where did you go?
We drove to 41st and Kildare.
And what happened when you got to 41st and Kildare?
We were met by a man and a woman, Hispanic couple that the male had told us that there was a male black offender that just left, and he pointed in the direction that he fled to.
Did the man say anything else to you at that time?
Something about his cell phone or charger or something in his pocket.
Was he holding anything when he was talking to you?
I think he was holding like a charger, and he said he might have my phone or something along those lines.
Did he say anything else to you, Betty?
No,
Did he say anything about that man attacking him?
no,
Did he say anything about a knife?
no.
How long did you speak with this man?
Maybe a minute or so.
Did you get out of the car to speak with him?
No, we rolled the window down.
Did Officer Gaffney get out of the car to speak with him?
No.
After this brief encounter with, did the woman say anything to you?
No.
So other than the information that we just heard on the radio transcript, and on the radio call rather, and the information about what the male told you, did you have any other information about the person you were looking for?
No, we didn't.
What did you do after that?
We drove toward the corner and made a right turn.
And what did you see when you made a right turn?
We saw a male black fitting the description that he had told us, hiding in like a corner, along the bushes.
And what happened then?
I exited the car and I told him to show me your hands, and he turned around and held his hands out. And at that point, he had hands in his pockets. So take your hands out of your pockets. And then when he took his hands out of his pockets, he held the knife out in his right hand.
Now, Your Honor, we have an aerial map 1 that I would like to use as for demonstrative purposes, the officer's testimony with the court's permission.
Do you have it marked as an exhibit?
Yes, Your Honor, it is marked as aerial map 1.
Okay. Any objection, Mr. McKay?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Pugh or Mr. Breen?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Fahey? All right, you can show it to the witness.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, if any of the attorneys cannot see, you can reposition yourself. If he's going to mark the diagram anyway.
Hey, officer, I'll bring this a little closer. And Your Honor, would it be okay if Officer McElligott reaches over or stands up and points to?
Do you want him to step down?
If you
It might be a little easier. You can step down.
Thank you. Could you point on the map, Officer McElligott, to where the man with whom you spoke in the yard, you now know that is Rudy Perez. Yeah. Could you indicate on the map where you encountered Mr. Perez?
It was around here.
I'm going to ask you to please keep your voice up because you're not near a microphone now.
Okay. And yeah, let's give you a little marker. And
Run.
I think we got a black marker.
Got that too?
Yeah, I think he's got permanent marker.
You're welcome.
I appreciate the offer. Okay, while that's being done, could you point the court to where you first saw Mr. Mcdonald?
Around the corner, probably about 20 or 30 feet coming off the street.
Okay. Okay, and now I think you could resume. Oh, thank you. Here, could you just mark RB for where you saw Mr. Arias and LM for where you first saw Mr. McDonald? Thank you, and I think you could resume the stand.
I'm sorry, I didn't see where you put the LM.
It's up there.
Where's the RV? Okay. Indicating for the record that the LM is closer to the street
41st Street.
Okay, thank you. 41st Street. That's there looks like to me three main buildings in that photograph. It would be the one that's in the middle, and so it's on the top left corner. And then RB was just a little bit below, maybe several inches below that. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. After Mr. McDonald showed you his hands and you saw that there was a knife in his right hand, what did you do?
I turned to my partner who was still in the car, and I told him that he has a knife.
And what happened next?
He told me to relax, that he's going to call for a taser, and then he got on the radio.
Your Honor, could we play the radio call from page 2, line 23 to page 3, line 11?
Okay, I'm sorry, page 2
Yes, line 23
through.
page 3, line 11.
Any objections, Mr. McKay?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
Mr.
Your Honor.
Okay, Mr. Beatty?
No objection, Judge.
Okay, thank you. You can publish.
Thank you.
401, they're more like 45. 401. Once I found it. Anybody have a taser? How about 401 Keeler for 15 Robert looking for a taser or defender? Archer and Logan. Alright, got any 12 coming? Anyone else out there? 401 Keeler with a taser?
Was that Officer Gaffney's voice which said we're on 40th and Keeler?
Yes.
Now, when Mr. McDonald turned around and you saw a knife in his hand, about how far away from him were you?
I was about 10 feet away from him.
And was he facing toward you or away from you?
At first, he had his back to us, and then when he turned around, he was facing me.
When when you saw the knife, did you say anything to Mr. McDonald?
I said, drop the knife.
And did he say anything to you?
No, he didn't say a word.
Did he ever say anything to you?
No, he never said a word.
After Officer Gaffney made this radio call and Mr. McDonald showed you your hands, what did Mr. McDonald do after?
He showed the knife. I drew my gun, and I had my flashlight in the other hand, and he began to walk eastbound on 41st Street.
And that is to the right side, in the direction of the right side of the aerial photograph?
Correct. I believe it's 40th Street.
Yes. And were you continually talking to Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
What were you saying?
I had been telling him to drop the knife. I probably said it 25, 30 times, different ways, drop the knife, let go of the knife.
And did he ever do that?
No.
How was he walking?
He was staggered. He would walk in front of the car. He'd walk to the side. He was kind of all over. He'd turn around every now and then and hold his hands out with the knife in his hand. And then he'd continue to walk with his back.
So when you say he turned around, he would turn around to face you?
He would turn around and hold his hands out, and then he would continue turning back around and walking eastbound.
When he turned around to face you, approximately how far were you from him?
I gained a little distance. He was probably 15, 20 feet.
Did you ever feel threatened by him?
I knew he was a threat. He was a potential threat. That's why we called for the taser, but I knew I'd just try to be patient and hang on. And we knew a car was coming with a taser, so we were just trying to hang out.
When he showed you the knife, did he ever make a threatening move towards you?
No.
Now, as you all were walking, there is in the middle of this aerial view, to the middle right-hand side, there is a white large building. Is that the Greater Chicago Food Depository?
Yes, it is.
And that is across, you have now crossed here, is that right?
That's correct.
And have you seen a videotape of you and Mr. McDonald and Defendant Gaffney from the Greater Chicago Food Depository?
Yes, I have.
Your Honor, at this point, we would seek to play People's Exhibit Greater Chicago Food Depository 1, which has been admitted in 10 minutes.
Any objection, Mr. McKay?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Pugh, Mr. Breen,
Mayor,
Mr. Fahey?
no, Judge.
All right, you may publish.
Thank you, Your Honor. And if you could narrate for the court what's happening when you see it happen. Is that Officer Gaffney's car that you can see at 9:53:31?
Yes. Officer Gaffney is in the car. We're right next to each other, paralleling as Laquan McDonald is walking away from us.
And there are the two headlights, and then there's another light to the left of the headlights. What is that other light?
There's a light on the car that's shining, and that, as well as my flashlight, like the spotlight for the car.
Now, if we could stop it for a moment. At 9:54:26, do you see Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
Is he the person in the black shirt?
Yes.
And can you see where you are?
Um,
Is this you? Do you want to keep, if you could keep it moving?
yeah, I'm a little further back. That's me with the flashlight.
Now, have you also seen a view from the Greater Chicago Food Depository pointed in the other direction?
Yes, I have.
Your Honor, I would ask to play People's Exhibit Greater Chicago Food Depository 2, which has been admitted in 10 minutes.
Any objection, Mr. McKay?
No.
Mr. Pugh, Mr. Breen,
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Fahey?
No, Judge.
All right, you may publish.
Now, at 9:53:47, is that Mr. McDonald?
Yes, it is.
And at 52, is that you?
Yes.
Right around there, sorry, at 02, Mr. McDonald turned around to face you.
Yes.
When he turned around to face you, did you feel like he was about to commit a battery on you?
I was prepared in case he were to come toward me.
Did he ever come towards you?
He did not.
Did you feel like he was going to commit a battery?
Not at that point.
Now, the first street you passed from with Mr. McDonald was Keeper, is that right? Keeler, I'm sorry. Keeler.
Yes,
And then the next street is Carla.
correct.
What happened as you approached Carla?
Officer Gaffney used the car to try to block his path.
And what happened when Officer Gaffney did that?
He turned the car in front of him, and Laquan McDonald continued walking, and he walked into the car, and he turned, like spun, and he had his back to the car, and he slammed the knife down and stabbed the front passenger right wheel.
So he has back to the car and
Stabbed the tire.
And which tire did he stab with his back to the car?
The front passenger.
Was anyone in the passenger seat of the car?
No, I was outside the car.
And how far away from you were you at this point?
10 or 15 feet.
What happened after Mr. McDonald stabbed the tire?
He continued walking. He walked away from the car and continued walking.
And what happened then?
After all the air went out of the tire, my partner attempted to block him off again.
And what happened then?
He walked into the squad car and stabbed the windshield.
Did you feel at that point that Mr. McDonald was about to batter Officer Gaffney?
I felt that he was protected. My partner was protected by the car, and the window did not shatter. So in my eyes, he was still a potential threat to hurt us, but he was protected for the most part.
Did you feel that Mr. McDonald had used force likely to cause death or great bodily harm?
If he had broken the window, it would have been different, but I felt he used force, but it was our car, so
the answer to the question.
We continued to monitor his actions.
The question is, did you feel, given that the windshield did not shatter, and that Officer Gaffney was in the car, did you feel that Mr. McDonald had used force likely to cause death or great bodily harm?
Not toward me, he did not.
Towards anybody?
I don't know.
We heard that Officer Gaffney reported this on the radio. Or did Officer Gaffney report this on the radio?
Yes.
Your Honor, I asked to play radio transcript 1, page 3, line 12, through page 5, line 12.
Page 3
Line 12,
through.
page 5, line 12.
Thank you. Any objection to that?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. McKay, Mr. Pugh, Mr.
Oh, yeah.
Green, Mr. Fahey? All right, you can publish.
Thank you.
Hey, partner. Stand by. I'm sorry to help Professor Robert. I guess 40 yeah, 40 and Keeler, 40 and Keeler.
Now, at this point, you're walking down Keeler towards Carlisle.
At that point, yes.
Everybody keep about what? And walking towards West, you stop Keeler, you stop at 40th Street. Again, armed with a Anybody with a 15 Robert yet?
And again, you're walking, still walking.
Anybody close yet? 401 Keeler. Are you gonna hold me or play it off with a 15 Robert at 214 that's for the Thunder with a knife? Anybody close? 401, they're more like 45 Robert, 45 Robert, 10-4 again. First unit with the Latino, 15 Robert, Carlos, good, or you had 4 by Latino? We're going to Virgin. And into the Virgin, 45 Robert, I see you pulling up. Robert, 10-4. 41 Robert, 41 Robert, 10-4.
What happened after Mr. McDonald scraped the windshield?
He continued to walk for probably 10 feet, and then he just full on sprinted.
And what did you do when he started sprinting?
I put my gun back in the holster and I ran after him.
And what did your partner do?
He continued eastbound into the Burger King lot.
Okay. Now, before we get there, we have one more view of your walk with Mr. McDonald, and that is in Google Map 1, and we would seek to play that for the court with the court's permission.
Any objection, Mr. McKay?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Pugh, Mr. Breen?
They are.
Mr. Fahey?
No objection.
Okay, you can publish.
Now, this is a daylight view, and obviously it was nighttime, correct?
Correct.
But we are on 40th Street, is that correct? Or is 41st?
It's 40th Street.
40th, thank you.
It's 40th Street.
And this is the street before you get to Keeler. Is that correct?
Correct.
And is this where you said Mr. McDonald was at times stumbling and going back and forth?
Yes. It wasn't a straight line. It was in and out of the street.
There's no sidewalk on this street.
No.
This white building, is that the Greater Chicago Food Depository?
Yes.
Got to stall for a second, but it'll pick up. And now alongside, once you cross Keeler, there is a sidewalk on this street.
Yes.
And here we are alongside the Greater Chicago Food Depository.
Yes.
Now at the stop sign, is that Karloff?
Yes.
And this is where Officer Gaffney turned his car onto Karloff.
Yes. Twice in that intersection.
And now past Karloff, on this is where
Right here.
Laquan McDonald started.
Right here was when he began running.
And that's is that the Burger King?
Yes.
Now, what happened when you got to the Burger King?
845 Robert came through the lot in front of me, right between me and Laquan McDonald.
And what happened then?
He followed Laquan in the car from behind, and I was behind 845 Robert's car.
And Your Honor, if we could show a brief clip from People's Exhibit 813R dash cam, perhaps the officer can point himself out.
Any objection, Mr. McKay?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Breen, Mr. Pugh,
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Fahey?
No, Judge.
Okay, you can publish.
If you could just say stop where you see yourself.
Stop.
Okay, who is this?
That's me.
Okay, and you're now right on the right-hand side of the screen at the back end of the Burger King building.
Correct.
Continue. Okay, and that's all that this video shows of you, is that right?
Yes.
What did you do then?
When they went out onto Pulaski, I stopped at the sidewalk because oncoming traffic was coming from the ramp on my left.
And what did you do after?
I walked up to the traffic light, and I stopped in the street. I waved a squad car in front of me, and they had cars to my right. I turned around and I stopped traffic from coming further southbound.
And what happened?
I heard gunshots.
Was your back turned towards the gunshot?
Yes.
Officer McElligott, understanding your testimony that you believed Mr. McDonald was a threat because he had a knife, correct?
Correct.
Did he ever make any threatening moves towards you?
No.
Not even when he was within 10 feet of you, facing you with a knife in his hand?
No.
Did he ever, or let me strike that. Why didn't you shoot Mr. McDonald?
I didn't feel that it was necessary at that point.
Even though he had damaged your vehicle?
He hadn't he had not made any moves toward me to put my life in jeopardy.
If he had put your partner's life in jeopardy, would you have shot?
Yes.
What happened? Now, you were at the scene for some time, is that correct?
Yes.
What happened when you got back to the station?
We went to the area to meet with the detectives.
And where was the area?
51st and Wentworth.
When you got there, or after you got there, was anyone viewing the video?
Yes.
Who was viewing the video?
I only saw viewing of that people were watching the Dunkin' Donuts video.
And who was doing that?
Several detectives, Officer Van Dyke, Officer Walsh.
And was anybody saying anything during the viewing of the video?
They were just discussing the positioning of where they were and during when he was shot.
Did anybody say anything about backpedaling?
I remember hearing somebody saying that Joe Walsh had been backpedaling.
Do you know who said that?
No.
Were they saying anything about what Officer Van Dyke was doing?
They were just trying to see the positioning of where he was I guess measuring, trying to see how many feet away he was and things like that.
Did you recall anybody saying anything about backpedaling with that?
I don't recall that.
Did you complete a TRR?
No.
What is a TRR?
It's a report when you make certain tactical responses to as far as your relation to an offender.
Did you make any responses in relation to the thing?
Other than having my gun on him the whole time, no.
Now, you are familiar with officer battery reports, are you not?
Somewhat.
Now, if you look behind tab 5 in your book, you will see People's Exhibit CPD Order 10.
Okay.
And you are familiar, as it says, 2A1, that the officer battery report will be completed for all incidents when a sworn member is the victim of a murder, aggravated battery, aggravated assault, or assault.
Yes.
You're familiar with that, correct?
Yes.
You did not complete an officer battery report, did you?
No.
Because you were not a victim of any of those things, correct?
I did not feel I was a victim of any of those things.
I may have one moment. Sure.
Take your time.
Nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you. Thank you all.
Okay.
It's okay.
I would say who's going to go first and cross this time? Mr. Fahey?
Yes, Judge.
Okay, you may
Thank you.
proceed.
Good afternoon, Mr. Officer McElligott.
Good afternoon.
When you were first arrived at the truck lot at 41st and Kildare, you mentioned that you were met by a Hispanic couple, a male and a female, correct?
Correct.
You and your partner didn't have a lot of time to talk to him at that point, did you?
No, he was pretty frantic, pointing to where he ran. So
He gave you a brief description of the offender,
yes,
but you didn't know what the call was for. It was about someone breaking into trucks. You at least knew that, right?
correct,
So at the very least, you knew that a burglary had been.
correct.
And in fact, you didn't even get out of the car, right?
Not at first, no.
But you had the passenger window rolled down,
Yes,
and you would have been closest to this couple speaking to them.
yes,
In other words, closer than your partner, Officer Gaff,
yes,
because your vehicle was facing northbound and Kildare.
correct.
Okay. And so after this conversation, I want to talk to you about when you first see the person we now know to be Laquan.
Okay.
That was on 40th Street, just east of Kildare, correct?
Correct.
And he was on the south side of the street.
Yes,
And when you first laid eyes on him, he had his hands in his pockets.
yes.
Obviously, that concerned you, right?
It's a
Did you get out of the car first and then see that, or did you see that before you got out of the car?
I got out of the car first.
Okay, so now you're out of the car and you see this person matching the description that Mr. Barillas gave you, and he's got his hands in his pockets, correct?
Correct.
Obviously, for officer safety, the first thing that you told him was to show you his hands.
Correct.
Did he remove his hands from his pockets?
He did.
And when he removed his hands from his pockets, you noticed that he opened a knife in his right hand, correct?
Correct.
Now, at that point, I think you testified on direct examination that you were 10 feet away from him.
Yes.
Do you remember testifying in front of the federal grand jury?
Yes.
And did that occur on June 24th of 2015?
Yes.
And do you remember describing, it's page 12 of the grand jury transcript? Do you remember at that time describing to the prosecutors that the distance was like 15 to 20 feet when you first saw him?
Yes.
Okay. So when you testified in 2015, you recall being further than 10 feet away from him, right?
Yes.
And when you saw this knife, was your first reaction as a police officer to get your gun out?
It was.
Okay. And that's obviously, again, for officer safety, right?
Yes.
Now you have an armed offender. It's not just a burglar, right? It's an armed offender.
Yes.
Very dangerous situation.
Yes.
So you immediately get your gun out and you ready your gun, correct?
Correct.
Because you know if he advances on you, you need to defend yourself, correct?
Correct.
What happened at that point?
He
Let me ask you this. Did you give him another command?
dropped the knife.
Drop the knife. And as you already testified, you said it more than one time, correct?
Yes.
Did you say it in all kinds of different ways?
Yes.
Practically pleading with him to just drop the knife, correct?
Correct.
When you first told him to drop the knife, did he drop the knife?
No.
When you told him the 20th time to drop the knife, did he drop the knife?
No.
Immediately upon seeing the knife, did you notify your partner, Officer Gaffney?
Yes.
Because obviously you're in a dangerous situation. You have to draw your weapon on Laquan McDonald, and you certainly need to notify your partner that you see a knife, correct?
Correct.
Now, shortly after you notified him, you're aware that he called for assisting units, correct?
Yes.
Get more resources there. And you also recall him calling for a taser,
Yes.
and he assured you that help was on the way,
Yes.
told you to relax.
He did.
Okay, told you there was a taser on the way.
Yes.
You guys had some time, correct?
Yes, we did.
And Laquan McDonald, instead of just dropping the knife, turned and started walking east toward Pulaski, correct?
Yes.
And that's when you followed him.
Yes.
And during that entire time that you're following him, you have your gun drawn on, correct?
Correct.
And during that entire time that you're following him eastbound, you're telling him to drop the knife.
Yes.
And your partner's paralleling you, right? As you described it?
Yes.
And he's still in his squad car?
Yes.
And the reason why your partner would be in the squad car is obviously if Laquan McDonald decided to run, the squad
It's faster than me.
is faster than you. A lot faster than me, too. Okay, so that's the purpose of one officer staying in the squad.
Yes.
And obviously that officer, you had both your hands tied up, correct?
Yes.
You had your gun in one hand and you had your flashlight in the other.
Yes.
You certainly couldn't work the radio at that point, could you?
No.
Okay, so your partner was the one on the radio.
Correct.
The dispatch. Trying to get additional resources there, trying to de-escalate the situation at Laquan McDonald. Correct? Correct?
I object. It's compound and it's contrary to the evidence.
That's fine, Judge. I'll-
Sustain.
Now, let me ask you this. I'm going to call your attention to when you got to 40th and Karlov. Karlov is the last street as you're going east before you hit Pulaski, correct?
Correct.
Now, you worked that beat, right? You're familiar with the area?
Yes.
Your partner, Officer Gaffney, worked that beat, correct?
Yes.
You knew that right a block east of Karlov is a Burger King, correct?
Yes.
It's a restaurant. It was open.
Yes.
There's also a truck lot right there where the trucks park.
Yes.
That's because the expressway is just north of there, correct?
Correct.
So it's populated with citizens.
Yes.
Certainly wouldn't want an armed offender who's refusing to drop his knife to walk into the parking lot populated with people, would you?
No.
You certainly wouldn't want that armed offender to get into the Burger King restaurant, would you?
No.
So when you got to 40th and Karlov, that is when, as you described, your partner maneuvered the squad car to block the path of Laquan McDonald.
Yes.
And the reason why he did that is he was hoping at that time, maybe he just dropped the knife and submit to your arrest, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. He cannot
That's
testify.
just, I don't even need a basis, that's sustain.
You saw the maneuver that he made with the squad car, correct?
Correct.
That maneuver blocked the path of Laquan McDonald, did it not?
Yes.
And when it blocked the path of Laquan McDonald, did Laquan McDonald drop his knife?
No.
Were you still telling him to drop the knife?
Yes.
When my client, Officer Gaffney, blocked his path is that the first time you saw Laquan McDonald actually use that deadly weapon, correct?
Yes.
And he used that deadly weapon by popping the passenger side front tire of your squad car.
Yes.
You could immediately hear the hissing sound of the air escaping the
Yes.
tire.
It left immediately.
Okay. There was a big gash in that tire, correct?
Yes.
So he had to slam that knife pretty good to leave that gash in there, right?
Yes.
Now, after Laquan McDonald did that, your partner inched the car up a little bit further, correct?
Yes.
So now Laquan McDonald is actually closer to your partner, right?
Yes.
And at that point, Laquan McDonald is actually facing your partner. Would you agree?
Yes.
He wasn't facing you, was he?
No.
And as he's facing your partner, did you see him raise the knife?
I saw him go on the hood, basically.
When you say go on the hood, before he went on the hood, did he raise the knife?
Yes.
Okay. And when he raised that knife, he was still facing your partner, right?
Yes.
Not you.
No.
And then you saw him swing the knife, and I think you described it, slammed it into the windshield, correct?
Yes.
So now he's used the knife to disable your squad car, correct?
Yes.
That obviously raised the threat level when he did that. Would you agree?
Yes.
You're already involved in a very dangerous situation. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
And after you saw him pop the tire, you then saw him face your partner and raise the knife.
Yes.
Would you agree that the threat level was increased at that point?
Yes, it was.
At the point that he raised the knife while he was facing your partner, and before he struck that knife on the windshield, you made a decision not to shoot him, correct?
Yes.
One of the factors you considered is that you were a safe distance from him, correct?
Yes.
So you didn't feel he was a threat to you.
No.
But you're not suggesting that he wasn't a threat to your partner, are you?
I don't know what my partner felt.
Okay. Well, you're certainly not trying to suggest that, if I understand your testimony, Officer Gaffney, I think what you're trying to explain is why you didn't shoot Laquan McDonald, correct?
Well,
Overruled. You can ask.
You're explaining why you didn't shoot Laquan McDonald, right?
Sort of.
Okay. Because you felt that you were a safe distance away from him, that he couldn't injure you with the knife, correct?
Correct.
And you felt that your partner had some protection from the squad car, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that's why you decided, and trust me, Officer McElligott, I understand. This is a split-second decision that you made, correct?
Yes.
And in that split second, you decided not to fire your weapon.
Yes.
You're certainly not trying to suggest that Laquan McDonald's actions didn't cause Officer Gaffney to be in fear of receiving a battery, are you?
Objection, right? I'm trying to suggest anything is answering the question. That's improper. That's an improper question.
The objection is sustained. You can rephrase.
Would you agree, Officer McElligott, that if an armed offender who refuses to drop his knife raises the knife at another officer, that person would be classified as an armed assailant?
Yes.
And I think you already testified, Officer McElligott, that you did not see the shooting that occurred on Pulaski, correct?
That's correct.
And you're aware that your partner also did not see the shooting?
I don't know what he saw.
Well, his vehicle was disabled, correct?
Yes.
And you knew he wasn't able to pursue Laquan McDonald onto Pulaski Avenue. Did you know that?
I knew that he went around in the parking lot. I don't know how fast or what the timing was, but I did not see him at that point.
Okay. Would you agree with me that Laquan McDonald was able to defeat your arrest?
Yes.
If I could ask you some questions about the scene after the shooting. Where was your squad car?
After the shooting,
Yes.
It was parked along the curb on Pulaski
Okay.
at the light.
Would it have been north of where the shooting occurred?
Yes,
What direction was it facing?
facing south.
Did you and your partner stay with the squad car?
Yes,
Because obviously the squad car had to be processed and photographed,
yes,
and the damage to the tire and the damage to the windshield was photographed.
yes,
So you and your partner were on the scene for some time, correct?
yes,
And while you're on the scene, did detectives come to the scene?
yes,
Obviously, a lot of police personnel came onto the scene, correct?
yes.
And at some point, do you recall doing I'm going to call it a drive-through, where you went with detectives and kind of showed them where everything
Yes.
occurred?
Yes.
Do you know who those detectives were?
No.
Was your partner with you at that time?
Yes, he was.
And so the purpose of that was to show where everything started, correct?
Yes,
It kind of walked them through Laquan McDonald's actions on 40th Street.
yes,
The other purpose was to look for any video evidence that might be on any of those buildings.
correct.
And one of the video evidence, in fact, that you saw today was from one of those buildings, correct?
Yes, it was.
That was the Greater Food Depository video.
Yes,
And obviously, those detectives would have been looking for any witnesses, correct?
correct.
There really weren't any citizens out there at that time of night in this industrial area, were there?
No,
The video that you were shown today from the Greater Food Depository, I think that's what it's called, the Greater Food Depository. It doesn't, you can't see what happens on Karloff Street on that video, correct?
no,
And that's just because
they're facing inward, the cameras.
in the video just doesn't extend that far all the way to Karloff, does it?
No,
At some point, as you testified, you did go back to Area Central,
yes,
and that's because detectives who were assigned to this case were continuing their investigation at the area.
yes,
There were, again, supervisors there,
yes,
bosses. Your supervisor was there,
yes,
Sergeant Stephen Franco,
yes,
who's also obviously your partner's supervisor too, correct?
that's correct.
At some point, were you told by your supervisor that you did not need to do any reports?
It was discussed whether I was technically a victim or not.
Okay.
And then they said you were out of the car, so that I was not in the car during that threat.
Okay. So you did not have to do a tactical response report in an officer battery report, correct?
No,
Now, there was also decisions made about your partner, Officer Gaffney, correct?
yes,
And Officer Gaffney was told that he did need to do a tactical response report.
That's sustained.
Was there a determination made about whether Tom Gaffney needed to do any reports?
yes,
Who made that determination?
I don't recall.
Your Honor, may I have a moment?
Certainly, take your time.
Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Okay, Mr. Green, Mr. Pugh, or Mr. McKay? Mr. Pugh?
Good afternoon, officer.
Good afternoon.
I'm one of the attorneys for Joe Walsh. You know Officer Walsh, correct?
Yes,
And I just want to follow up on something that Mr. Fahey was asking you. In terms of the decision for you to potentially do a tactical response report or or an officer battery report, that was something that was the discussion between you and your supervisors. Is that right?
Everybody pretty much involved, the detectives, the supervisors, it wasn't really the officers that made that decision.
Okay, so in terms of whether or not a TRR would be completed or an officer battery report would be completed by a patrolman such as yourself, that was left to the supervisors to make that decision based upon all the facts that were shared with them. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay, and that is the normal protocol for Chicago Police Department as it existed at the time. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, if I could, may I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Officer McElligott, you showed us on, I think this is the People's Google Earth map here, that you first encountered the offender, Laquan Mcdonald, right here where you've marked LM. Is that right?
Correct.
And you stayed with him and followed him for 1, 2, 3 blocks until we get to Pulaski. Is that right?
That's correct.
Would you agree with me that based upon what you were observing and hearing at the time as related to Mr. McDonald, that the threat level increased as to Mr. McDonald as he moved these 3 blocks closer to Pulaski?
Yes.
And while this threat level was increasing with Mr. McDonald, you are sharing this information with your partner, is that correct?
He's next to me. He could see his actions.
You
The
think
same
the same
actions as
thing you
me.
could see. And information is being relayed on the radio, is that right?
Yes.
And based upon what you were observing regarding Mr. McDonald, you felt that it was appropriate that additional officers get called to the scene to assist you, is that right?
Yes.
Would it be fair that you did not believe at the time that the threat level you observed with Laquan McDonald was sufficient that you and your partner could handle it on your own?
Correct.
And was that one of the reasons why Officer Walsh and his partner arrived at the scene and other officers?
Yes.
Objection. Can't testify as to why Officer Walsh.
Well, that's sustained to the form of the question.
Did you observe Officer Walsh as a partner arrive at the scene?
Yes.
And did they arrive at the scene based upon the call that you and your partner had made regarding what was going on with Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
Now, if I'd like to just ask you some questions, if I could, about what you observed and the things that you did when you first exited your vehicle. When you first exited your vehicle, I think if I understand correctly, you did not observe any type of weapon on Mr. McDonald's person. Is that right?
Not immediately.
Would it be fair that once you exited your vehicle, you were now present in uniform in front of Mr. McDonald, that he displayed this knife within seconds?
Yes.
And once Mr. McDonald displayed the knife, did you take any action because of that?
I took my gun out.
And did you take a step back and give more space between you and Mr. McDonald at that time?
Yes.
And
I
did you
backed up to the squad car.
What's that?
I backed up to the squad car until my partner.
And you did that because despite the fact that you were armed with a handgun at the time, you felt there was a danger being posed because you had an individual in front of you who a crime had just been reported that he had been involved in. Is that right?
Yes.
And that now he had armed himself in police officer presence. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Once Mr. McDonald observed you being present in uniform with another officer, did he comply with any type of commands?
No.
Did you apply repeated verbal directions to him?
Yes.
At any point in time from that period that we see on the map to your left, during that 3-block period and all the way until Mr. McDonald gets to last, at any point in time, did he comply with any of your verbal commands?
No, he did not.
Did you ever observe him comply or respond appropriately to any officer verbal commands?
No.
Would it be fair to say that after applying these verbal commands to Mr. McDonald, at some point in time, he gave flight command.
Yes.
And when he did so, was it your observation that he was doing so to avoid being taken into custody?
Yes.
You did believe that while you were following Mr. McDonald, once he had displayed a knife to you, and you had learned some information from a citizen at the truck yard, that you did have probable cause to arrest Mr. McDonald at that time. Is that correct?
Yes.
And would it be fair that Mr. McDonald was doing everything in his power that you were able to observe to defeat being arrested?
Yes.
While you and Mr. McDonald and Officer Gaffney were on, is that 40th or 41st? I'm not sure.
It's 40th.
On 40th Street, moving eastbound towards Pulaski, would it be accurate that at least at one point in time, Mr. McDonald closed the distance between him and the vehicle that was occupied by Officer Gaffney?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Yes.
And Officer Gaffney, I think we know he was in a clearly marked Chicago police vehicle. Is that right?
That's correct.
And at the time that you observed Mr. McDonald close the distance between himself and the vehicle occupied by Officer Gaffney, that was at the time that you were telling Mr. McDonald to drop the knife. Is that right?
That's correct.
While you were making your observations of Laquan McDonald, you told us at some point, I think you said you took off, you bolted. Is that correct?
Yes.
And when you say bolted, would that be fair that Mr. McDonald took off in a full sprint?
Yes.
And you attempted to pursue on foot. Is that right?
That's correct.
But I think I don't know if you told us this already, Mr. McDonald was quite a bit quicker than you.
Yes.
Right? Now, at the time that Mr. McDonald took off in full flight, Officer McElligott, was that at a time that the lights from arriving backup vehicles became apparent on 40th Street?
Yes.
Was it your observation that Mr. McDonald's flight to the east was based upon the arrival of assisting officers?
It seemed like it to me. There were windows on a building on the north end of the street where you could see a reflection of the squad car lights. And it seemed as if simultaneously when I saw the lights, he took off running.
Now, when Mr. McDonald took off running, was the knife that you had observed initially on the corner still in his hand?
Yes.
At any point in time, did you see Mr. McDonald discard or put away or fold away this weapon?
No.
Would it be accurate that from the first moment that you saw what you described as a knife on Mr. McDonald's person, you could clearly see that that was a knife? Is that right?
Yes.
The blade was exposed at all times based upon your observations. Is that right?
Yes.
Would it be accurate, based upon your observations that evening, that at no point in time, up to and after the shooting that occurred in this case, Mr. McDonald never, ever released this weapon?
That's correct.
During the time prior to Mr. McDonald taking off at a full bolt flight, would it be fair to characterize his behavior and the way he was walking as erratic?
Yes.
Did that give you some concern as to the way Mr. McDonald was walking and carrying himself?
Yes, it was a look in his eye as well.
When you say a look in his eye, can you please tell us what look in Mr. McDonald's eye did you observe when you were close enough to see his face?
At first, when he first turned toward us, it was like his eyes rolled in the back of his head.
Did he appear to be under the influence?
Yes, he appeared to be under something.
And did the fact that the offender in this case was armed and appeared to be under the influence, did that increase your feeling of the threat level?
It almost decreased. I felt as though he was not coherent enough to hurt me.
Okay, and did you convey that information to anybody that Mr. McDonald appeared to be not coherent enough to hurt you?
No.
Now, and those are observations that you made initially of Mr. McDonald.
Those were in my mind.
Once Mr. McDonald took off at a full bolt towards Pulaski, did he appear to be much more coherent at that time?
Yes.
And I don't know if I asked you this or not. Was the fact that Mr. McDonald was, well, in looking at the map that seems to show the area where you first encountered Mr. McDonald, would it be fair to say that Mr. McDonald was moving from a less populated area to a more populated area?
Yes.
And the fact that Mr. McDonald was heading towards a commercial district where there was a Burger King and a busy boulevard such as Pulaski, did that cause you greater concern?
Yes.
Now, after the shooting in this case, I think you and your partner remained on scene for about an hour. Is that right?
I'm not sure the time. It was a while.
And during that time, I think you've already told us that there were efforts, that you observed some efforts by fellow officers to collect all video that was in the area that would have captured these incidents. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you actually assisted in identifying where there might be cameras at, say, the Greater Chicago Food Depository. Is that
Yes.
right?
That's,
I believe, did you also see that there were cameras at Dunkin' Donuts?
we went west from where
You went west from the scene, is that right?
we didn't observe. They may have observed it, but when we went on the drive,
I think you told us, though, that when you got back to Area Central, it was brought to your attention, or you were able to observe that someone had collected video from the Dunkin' Donuts that was
That's
near the
correct.
scene. Is that right?
yes.
And you were actually interviewed by detectives on the scene about everything that you had observed and what you testified to today. Is that right?
That's correct.
And following your time at the scene, you were told to return or to go to Area Central. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you started your evening at the 8th District. Is that right?
Yes.
But because of this incident, an officer-involved shooting, you had to go to Area Central. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that was standard protocol after an incident such as this, that you would return to the detectives division. Is that right?
That's correct.
While you were at the scene, I don't know if Mr. Fahey asked you this or not, you did not interview any civilian witnesses. Is that correct?
We did not.
And you did not see any civilian witnesses to interview at the scene. Is that right?
No, we did not.
And because there were detectives on scene, it would not have been really your job as a patrolman to be interviewing witnesses. Is that right?
Oh, that's correct.
And Joe Walsh was a patrolman just like yourself that night. Is that correct?
Yes.
If I got one moment, please, Your Honor.
Certainly, take your time.
Thank you, officer.
You're welcome.
Okay, Mr. McKay.
Mr. McElligott, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Officer McElligott, the detectives that arrived on the scene didn't arrive until they were notified, correct?
Correct.
By somebody who was a police officer in the 8th District, right?
Yes.
And which means then that the detectives who arrived on the scene arrived several minutes after this incident was over, correct?
Correct.
So if there are any witnesses at the scene who decided to leave, it's not the detective's fault if those people weren't interviewed. Would you agree?
I would agree.
Thank you, sir. And speaking of detectives, you had never met Detective David March before that night, correct?
No.
And he interviewed you at the scene, didn't he?
I believe you did. Yes.
And you were near your damaged squad car with Detective March, correct?
Yes.
And Tom Gaffney was there, but the two of you were separated briefly for Detective March to do your respective interviews, right?
Correct.
And when Detective March was interviewing you at the scene, he was taking notes, wasn't he?
He was.
May I approach, Judge?
Yes.
Officer McElligott, I'm going to show you an exhibit, which I have marked as Defendant's March Exhibit number 6 for identification. This is a general progress report, is that correct?
Yes.
And before you testified this afternoon, you had an opportunity to look at this, correct?
Yes.
And isn't it true, Detective, it's right there, isn't it true, Officer McElligott, that this is an accurate summary of the statements you gave to Detective David March at the scene on the evening of October 20th, 2014?
Yes, it is.
Thanks. And to be clear, Officer McElligott, after you talked to David March at the scene, at some point he then separately talked to your partner, Officer Thomas Gaffney, right?
Yes.
And while David March was talking to Tom Gaffney, you did not know what Tom Gaffney was telling David March, right?
No.
Conversely, when David March was interviewing you, did it appear to you that Tom Gaffney was too far away to hear what you were telling David March?
I don't recall
Okay.
how far it was.
Now, how long were you at the scene before you went to the area?
It seemed like quite a while, a couple hours at least.
Okay. But to be clear, sir, when you got to the area, you did not speak to David March anymore, correct?
No.
You only talked to David March at the scene.
Yes.
So that means David March was not a part of any discussion about whether you were to be a victim of an aggravated assault or not a victim of an aggravated assault, correct?
I don't know where he was while I was there.
Thank you. Now, this citizen who had called 911 that night, you later learned that his name was Rudy Barillas, right?
Yes.
And on direct examination, when Mr. Safer was asking you questions, I thought I heard you say that Mr. Barillas had told you at the scene at 40th and Keeler, I believe.
Kildare.
Kildare? Thanks.
Yes.
At 40th and Kildare that night, this gentleman, Mr. Barillas, said that the offender may have Mr. Barillas' phone.
Yes.
And in Illinois, we have a crime called robbery, don't we?
Yes.
And if an offender uses a weapon during a robbery, it's then called an armed robbery, right?
Yes.
Now, Officer Gaffney called for a taser, correct?
Yes, he did.
Now, Officer McElligott, at that time, the tasers.
I'm sorry, I'm a little slow. Sorry, Mr. McKay. It's just contrary to the evidence, Your Honor. We've already established that Officer Gaffney did not call for a taser. We can misstate the record, but it just makes for a muddy record.
Well, let's clear it up.
No, let me
I'll
rule.
withdraw my question. I'll withdraw.
Okay, if you want to do that, otherwise I'm prepared to rule. But if you're withdrawing the question, the question is withdrawn.
Officer McElligott, some police officer called for a taser, right?
Officer Gaffney called for a taser.
Regarding the tasers at that time, they were tasers that used two prongs that would shoot out, correct?
Yes.
And these two prongs would have to attach to the target,
Yes.
right? And these two prongs, they had a limited amount of wire attached to them, correct?
Yes.
And by the way, I don't know if the terminology is any good here, but the bottom line is that tasers are really useless when the offender's running away, right?
They can be. They're harder to use.
Right. And to be clear, not only do both prongs have to be striking, not only do both prongs have to hit the target, both prongs have to go through the clothing, penetrate the clothing to stop that individual, right?
Most of the time.
Yeah. And you said you told McDonald anywhere from 25 to 30 times to drop the knife, right?
Yes.
Would you agree that at least after the first time you told him to drop the knife, every time thereafter you told him to drop the knife and he refused to comply, every one of those times he was attempting to defeat your arrest?
Yes.
He was attempting to escape from you and Officer Gaffney, right?
Yes.
And Mr. Saper showed you that video during the daylight of how you and the defendants, right, that you and McDonald traveled from 40th and Kildare eastbound, right? Quite a distance, is it not?
Yes.
You showed remarkable patience as you followed him on foot. Would you agree?
Yes.
But even though you never felt compelled to pull your trigger, your gun was out.
Yes.
He was still a threat, agreed?
Yes.
You were, at the very least, apprehensive, were you not?
Yes.
You were very alert, correct?
Yes.
He was unpredictable, to say the least, right?
Yes.
Would you allow yourself tonight to tell us that a little bit of fear set in for you?
Yes.
You had no idea what this guy was going to do, did you?
No.
But what happened soon after all of these announcements for this man to stop and drop the knife, you saw him pop the tire on Officer Gaffney. You're in Officer Gaffney's vehicle, right?
Yes.
Would you agree when he popped the tire with all that force, that at very least is a violent act by McDonald?
Yes.
And right after that, while on this hood, he took that knife and slammed it on the windshield.
Yes.
Would you agree that that's a violent act too?
Yes.
With every step you took going down 40th Street, eastbound, towards Pulaski, every step you took closer to Pulaski, that industrial area became more of a populated area, right?
Yes.
And would you agree that when your partner, Officer Gaffney, was trying to block him at that location at 40th and Carlo, thank you, sir. One reason to do that was you cannot let Mr. McDonald get to that burger, can you?
Judge, can't testify as a question.
I'll rephrase.
Thank you.
Officer McElligott, you knew the further east McDonald went, the more populated that area was.
Yes.
You knew, after all your years in the 8th District, that Burger King was open that night, right?
Yes.
And you knew the possibility of innocent citizens in that Burger King could be potential victims, correct?
Yes.
If McDonald was allowed, right, that if McDonald got to that Burger King and went inside, we could have a hostage situation, right?
Yes.
And this non-compliance with police commands then turns into something far worse. Would you agree?
Yes.
But what happened is when McDonald picked up his pace as he approached that Burger King, so did you.
Yes.
So McDonald goes from walking with knife in hand to running with knife, right?
Yes.
And you're running after him too with flashlight and gun out.
Yes.
And were you able to see that when McDonald ran out onto Pulaski, did you see the part where McDonald stopped running and started walking again?
No, he was further ahead of me.
You did not see the shooting.
No.
But after you heard the shots, you eventually did turn back and went southbound on Pulaski, right?
Yes.
You saw Officer Joe Walsh kick the knife out of McDonald's hands, right?
Yes.
You did not see Joe Walsh bend over to pick up the knife with Joe's hand, did you?
No.
Regarding your interview with David March on the scene, or any interview by any other police officer that night, no one instructed you to make it look like this was justified. Isn't that correct?
No.
That is correct?
That's correct. Nobody.
Judge, can I have a moment?
Yes. Take your time.
Your Honor, on behalf of David March, I would like to adopt the cross-examinations of both Mr. Fahey and Mr. Pugh, and with that, I have no further questions.
Okay. Any redirect?
Very briefly, Officer McElligott, you were just asked whether you were running after Laquan McDonald with your flashlight and your gun out. You actually holstered your gun when you started running,
Yes, I did.
so you didn't have your gun out when you were running after Mr. McDonald.
No, I didn't.
Now, let's clear up the taser issue, who called for the taser issue again.
Okay.
If you would turn to, in your book, to tab 2, which is People's Exhibit Radio Transcript 1, and turn to page 3, line 1, where it says speaker. It says, we're at 40th and Keeler. This guy's kind of walking away from us. He's got a knife in his hand. Do you see that?
Yes.
That was Officer Gaffney, correct?
Yes.
Doesn't say anything about a taser, does it?
Not in this, it doesn't. You
Right.
could hear it in the video if you want to replay the video.
The dispatcher says,
Objection, Judge, if he could just finish his answer. He was trying to
That's
explain.
sustained. He was in the middle of an answer if you'd let him finish.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
I don't,
Just
I
ask another-
interrupted you.
Ask another question.
Okay. The dispatcher says, all right, anybody have a taser to help out 4-0 and Keeler for 815 Robert, looking for a taser armed defense.
Your Honor, I have an objection to that. To clarify it, as Mr. Sager is trying to do, can we just replay the audio tape of that communication?
I think that's a good suggestion.
You're in agreement with that?
Yes.
I was going to rule that way anyway. So why don't we just play it?
Multi Robert. Hey, we're at 40th. This guy got one with me. Anybody have a taser? How about 401 Keeler for 815 Robert? Looking for a taser armed defender.
It was when he said about the walking. I could hear it.
Should we play that again? It is on there. It's very garbled. I don't
Your
think it's
Honor.
a big issue, but it is actually on.
Okay.
I don't think you need to play it again. You replayed it. He testified as to what he heard. If I need to hear it later, I can always replay it once at a position or whenever I need to.
Sounds great, Your Honor. Thank you.
He directed me exactly to where it is.
Perfect.
We're all good.
Thank you. You were asked, Officer McElligott, whether Mr. McDonald complied with any other officer's commands that evening. Do you recall that question?
I don't recall that question.
What, did you hear any other officer commanding Mr. McDonald to do anything that evening?
No.
Mr. McDonald defeated your arrest by fleeing, correct?
Correct.
If I could have one moment.
Certainly. Take your time.
Nothing else, Your Honor. Thank
Nothing?
you.
Okay. Mr. Fahey, any recross?
I have no further questions. Thank you, Judge.
Okay. Mr. Pugh, any recross?
Nothing.
Mr. McKay, any recross?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. You're excused. You may step down. We have just a quick sidebar regarding scheduling. I don't need the court reporter.